Hey, it's Mike Brennan, and we're recording this on Thursday, the 23rd. And boy, has thunder and lightning struck in the cannabis world starting yesterday when President Trump said he was going to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1, which we all know that's heroin and cocaine and no medical properties, to Schedule 3, which is more of a pharmaceutical drug, but not specifically, but if you're going to liken it to something, I guess that would be a good example. Then today, Thursday, the DOJ came out, the Attorney General, the acting Attorney General, since we lost Bondi, came out and said it was just focused on medical marijuana. So, and then I just read a report, or actually, I read a bulletin from the Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency, and they don't even know what's going on. And they're doing an evaluation right now to see if that's going to impact how we do cannabis business in Michigan. So let me start off with reintroducing my co-host, Tim Beck, been around forever, one of the founding fathers of the original laws, right, Tim?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mike. Yep.
Okay, and then we have
I
now.
worked. I worked myself out of a job. I worked myself out of a job.
Oh,
I've been at a long time. I was my
you,
motive was never to go into business. It was
ah,
to because it was a social justice issue. It was the right
got it.
thing to do.
And,
But
and
that
you
happened. So yeah.
and why don't you run a Google group that I'm a part of? So why don't you tell folks about that?
Yeah, it's a group called the Safer Michigan Coalition. It was created in 2009. And what happened, Michigan Normal, there was an internal dispute within Michigan Normal, and myself, and a guy named Chuck Ream, who was a major activist in the state, decided that Michigan Normal was just not up to the job. The leadership structure and everything else was just not. Um, they just didn't feel we didn't feel they had what it takes to get the job done. So we created our own group to replace Normal, and it's grown from that. We have 410 people officially, and they're we got members of the CRA are on it. We've got lots of attorneys, activists, business owners, uh, regulators. Just all kinds of folks that have an interest in it, and
Oh,
lobbyists are another. So
okay.
that's a daily news feed that we
Yes.
do, and
All
hot
right.
and heavy today.
And then we have with us Scott Roberts, and I work closely with Scott. He's been working on and off with me for a number of years, and he's with Oak Law. And I know you got a couple of titles. Why don't you lay that on the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the senior corporate counsel over at Oak Law, and I'm also the managing broker at Michigan Cannabis Properties.
Okay. So we actually were talking before I started to record, but the confusion right now is no one, I don't even think the Department of Justice knows exactly what's going on. It might be just one of those, we're making an announcement and we'll let the dust or the whatever fall where it may, kind of thing. But let's start with Scott. You're the attorney. I posted a couple stories and got called out that I was putting up wrong information, and I don't even know what the right information is. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things this does, and there's a lot of things that we don't really know. But what it does do is it does put medically state licensed cannabis in Schedule 3 today, right away. And then it also applies to FDA drugs utilizing marijuana. So it does that. Medical marijuana subject to state, licensing is legal now. Whereas a week ago, it was not. What it also does, it kind of took the prior rescheduling process that was happening and was initially initiated under Biden and then hit a lot of roadblocks. There was some appeals. It kind of restarts it and expedites it. So there's going to be a hearing in June. And then there is a thought that final rules could come out of that as soon as July. Seems a little quick, but it's possible. And then from there, there's generally between a 30 to 60, 90-day review process on those rules, and then it could become final. And there's a lot of speculation into what those rules will be and what they will say. And that's where, we can speculate, but quite frankly, we just don't know. And what this doesn't do, and I think that's very important to, explain to people, is right now, this really doesn't do anything for recreational or adult use marijuana other than expedite the rulemaking process to put it into Schedule 3. Um, Other than that, we can speculate on all sorts of things, and I'm sure we will, but it does not do that. Adult use marijuana is not legal today, but medical is.
Yeah, I would say that's my take also, and you're being very level-headed about it, the way you're explaining it there, Scott. I would say I've been accused of being a Pollyanna, okay, type person, and maybe I'm reading things into this that aren't really there. But I guess what um, puzzles me is how I've never heard of a drug like, let's say, heroin, okay, or LSD or something like that, being both Schedule 1 and Schedule 3 or 4 or 5. I don't get it. This is just bizarre in my mind anyway. And I think, however, being, like I say, taking a conservative here and now approach, I would say you're probably correct, although this really leaves open the floodgates for litigation. I also believe that this hearing it's coming up is critical. The DEA has been fighting this and fighting this and fighting this to foot drag and slow walk the whole deal. They're finally on board. I read statements from the head of the DEA said, "Yep, we're going to do it. We're going to expedite it. We're going to do this thing in June." And I think the plan is to completely, go have marijuana in a totality in Schedule 3, which means, and see, Trump has been accused by a lot of cynics and everything like that. He's only doing this to reward and please big marijuana and give them this massive tax break for help that they've got from him and everything like that in the past. I think that's the ultimate goal. And again, I heard one. I can't reveal any names, but I got a communication from a big, business person, and they have both, medical as well as recreational licenses, and their interpretation as well. It's all go. It's all medical. So yeah.
Yeah,
I think one could say that's wishful thinking, but go ahead. What do you think, Scott?
I would say this certainly demonstrates their intent to have all of marijuana be Schedule 3 very soon. It's just right now it's not. And to kind of Tim's point on taxes, there's a lot of interesting stuff there because I have heard that there are people now lobbying potentially to say our adult use program is really just an over-the-counter medical, and if it's an over-the-counter medical, then I guess we are Schedule 3.
Mhm.
And then also what I think is really interesting is it's 280E. I think that's the elephant in the room because, once 280E no longer applies, which it will no longer apply, when it becomes Schedule 3 adult use, then, that changes the economics of this business quite a bit in favor of the operators. But one thing I did see in the order that's very interesting to me, at least as a lawyer, is there's a line saying we encourage Treasury to grant retroactive 280 relief to medical operators. Um, but it says medical operators. It does not say adult use operators.
Yeah.
There's been many, many, many companies
True.
in Michigan throughout the country that stopped paying 280E a while ago. A year, 2 years ago plus. So then the question is, are they going to have to make it up? And another interesting note on that is, there is the cannabis whisperer, the lady down in Florida that operates at MSO, and
Yeah.
she's only medical. So you got to wonder, if this Trump whisperer, it may very well be that they only grant retroactive 280E relief to medical, which just so happens to help this individual, but does not help any of her competitive MSOs. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on here that still need to play out.
Yeah. Well,
I think
I was thinking that exact same thing, Scott. Especially, well, what the heck? It's Trulieve. That's her corporation. Okay, in Florida, and they got over 200, if I'm aware, medical dispensaries in Florida. It's only medical is only legal, and there's all kinds of people. Well, okay, they're all sick, of course. They all got doctor's cards, but come on, folks, get real. It's almost de facto legalization. If you could find doctors to write, an excuse for, whatever, anything to get a card, they're going to do really well. I mean, this is immediate relief, for them. And I think it, like I say, there's all kinds of interpretations, but but the thing of it is, if somebody wants to kind of skirt the rules or kind of, how should I put it, operate in a gray area, this certainly gives them fuel for litigation that will help their case if they go to court. And you got to assume if the IRS decides to get tough, and I'm skeptical that they will. Again, keep in mind the the IRS is an entity, a creature of the executive branch. They can get rid of the head of the IRS, I mean, real fast, and get somebody in that's going to, have the right attitude. Okay, let's put it that way.
Well, let
I
me
could see
jump
that.
in real quick and define 280E because you all are cannabis experts, but the general business audience might not understand what you're talking about. Scott, what's 280E?
So 280E is a special provision in the tax code that says if you operate a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 business, you can't take business deductions. COGS is not technically a business deduction, it's a top line deduction. So you can still deduct your cost of goods sold, but outside of that, you can't deduct the rest of your regular business expenses.
Like
So like if you
marketing or things like
run a
that.
building,
Yeah.
can't deduct.
Yeah.
Whereas, this would change the game in such that cannabis companies could deduct all expenses as if it was just a regular company, which is something, cannabis companies have been fighting for a decade plus.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's and really one of the entities that was internal entities that were fighting this really hard was the DEA. That organization is run by fossils. I mean, for a long time, they're in a kind of mode. They're very, very hostile. They want to do anything to keep the status quo and keep it illegal and on for whatever godforsaken reason.
Well, then
They're
that
doing that.
justifies the DEA. There may be a reason right there, but go ahead, So I said
Yeah,
that. Nobody else said that. So come after me, DEA, so.
That's the thing, and it seems, given statements that were from the head of the DEA, they're falling into line. I have never heard that type of talk from the DEA. They'd either stonewall, or they'll give some passive aggressive, hostile kind of reaction to everything, to any change. Period. This is the thing. I was stunned, absolutely stunned, to see the DEA is finally they're just doing it. And again, there's a theory, and I believe it's true, that the Attorney General of the United States really, some legal experts believe that they can do this all by themselves. It's basically just an administrative a policy that's being done. And if the Attorney General says, "Hey, buddy, we're it's being rescheduled," it's rescheduled, and the
Well,
DEA
Dana
can't do
Nessel's
anything
always been
about it.
real friendly to the cannabis industry, and it was the cannabis industry that helped get her elected for good reason, right? So,
Mhm.
but then we're going to get a new attorney general come January. God only knows what that's going to be, right?
Yeah, my sense of it, I mean, if it's the Democrat that got the nomination, this Elliott Savit, I mean, it's going to be a golden age for cannabis. I mean, this guy is really, really super liberal. As far as the GOP nominee, I don't know much about it. I'm not aware he's ever made any statements about marijuana, but my sense of it is that this has been on for a long time, and they're not going to be able to turn back this tide at this
Well,
point.
they're
And
like 70% of Americans in a recent poll said, "Why not?" People want to, if they're adults and they want to smoke cannabis and they're not hurting
Mhm,
anybody, and particularly if they're in their own home, who cares, right?
mhm,
So,
mhm,
but let's get back to what we do and don't know. I published because I was going real quickly last night trying to keep up with the news that the 280E might also apply to adult rec, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. So I think my reporting was off, so I'll have to correct that. But is that your
Not
take, Scott?
yet. Yeah, I would say not yet, but it certainly evidences an intent for them to get rid of it. Probably as part of these rules that are expected around July. But a lot is left open. in terms of what these rules will actually say. Because, Schedule 3 for adult use is kind of interesting, contradictory, because, Schedule 3 basically requires a prescription, and adult use does not. So there's kind of an inherent conflict there. And then the question becomes, how much authority does FDA decide to assert over adult use? Does it kind of go the hemp route and say, hey, we're gonna regulate health claims. You can't make health claims that are prohibited, but otherwise, free for all, states take care of it. We're not getting involved.
So
They could also just not address it entirely, or they could, go the route and say, you all have to register with us and you're all going to be subject to our, quality control and marketing standards and, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And, and that's where we're just, again, we're speculating.
My
so
my you know my sense is that the government bodies, they usually suffer for better or worse from inertia. They kind of prefer the status quo, and the status quo right now. Come on, folks, marijuana is federally illegal. One hit from a marijuana cigarette for any reason is illegal under federal law. And now all the states are doing their own thing, and the federal government is not enforcing federal law. And I think that would be the logical thing that would happen. I think that the FDA would just let it ride too, and just kind of keep the status and let states regulate it.
Yeah,
let
I
me
mean, I think
let me leap in real quick. Gummies, for instance, I use a gummy sometimes to help me sleep, and so that's on the labeling. So if that's the kind of, is that medical marijuana? Is that rec? What is that? So
Uh-huh.
well,
Hmm.
depending how it's worded, it could be considered a health claim. And then if it's a health claim and it's, subject to FDA rules on health claims, then the federal government could step in and say, "Hey, gummy manufacturer, you can't make that claim." Um, and again, like that's where we just don't really know if the federal government's going to say. And I think there's some indication that they're willing to just kick this to the states. In a way, that's kind of what they just did on the medical, and I think there's a good possibility that's the tack they go. But they could also do that similar how they did it to the hemp laws, where they kick to the states, where they still have certain points they still regulate, like health claims.
the other thing we need to point out is in the March report for sales, I think it was around $400,000 is all medical marijuana did versus what 270 overall. So it's like less than 1% of the market. So it's going to have pretty minimal impact initially in Michigan, right?
If you
Yes.
are interpreting the law the way Scott described it, and I'm a little skeptical, Scott, but I'm going to assume you're right. Okay, and
There's much subject to interpretation here. I'll give you that.
yeah.
Well,
No.
I think maybe Tim, where you're going is saying, if someone has a dual license and they're medical and recreational, could they just claim, hey, even though most of our sales are under recreational, we're really medical, so
Mhm,
we're
mhm,
subject to this.
mhm.
Um, that's
Well,
something open to interpretation.
there's one guy. I can't mention name. He already told me that's what he's going to do with with his dispensaries, because they got both. They got both medical, as well as recreational licenses, and that's the route he's going. That's their interpretation. And I'm wondering, sometimes, the IRS doesn't bust every tax cheat in the world. There's all kinds of people that are fish that are getting through the net and into the system, and it all depends. I have a CPA buddy that was telling me the other day about auditing. And there's this question because the IRS came out with a statement that bud tenders can't deduct tips, okay, because it's Schedule 1. Okay, now this attorney, I was digging into that, and a bud tender, I don't know what they make, 30, 40, 50 grand a year, something like that, perhaps. And the fact is, it's under 1% of the people making $50,000 or less are never audited. Are ever audited by the IRS. and especially with budget cutbacks to the IRS. The IRS budget has been decimated, so they're not going after little people and little folks. And I really question how aggressively, I mean, we'll see, but how aggressively the IRS is going to even be about this 280E thing as the process goes. It's up to question now. It's a question mark now, I agree. But I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's a pretty good chance by, end of summer, this medical or recreational distinction, in terms of these things kind of becomes moot because they go forward with rescheduling for all of marijuana, and then it doesn't make much of a difference. But another thing that remains to be seen, we're, again, lots of speculation.
We only got about 5 minutes left. Let me talk about June. Now, is the hearings and topic going to be just medical, or do you think, I'm asking Scott here, or do you think they're also going to take a look at rec? Are they going to do medical first, and then maybe in the fall have hearings for rec, or what's your thinking?
I mean, my understanding of this, and this is all within the last 24 hours. I'm trying to digest it with everyone else. Is that it's going to be for all of marijuana, and medical was just kind of checked off right now, as of today, and then the rest of it will play out how it was already going to play out. Though they've kind of terminated the prior attempt and are trying a new expedited attempt at it.
And then let me continue with that thought. If both of them go to Schedule 3, what does that mean for banking? I mean, a lot of right now federally chartered banks are staying away from this. Too much paperwork, too much hassle. Do you think they'll take a second look at it, or what?
Yes, but it's not going to happen overnight. Banks are like, freighters. They don't just like turn on a dime. It takes months, years for them to make these decisions. I think they'll see the writing on the wall, and even though adult use would be Schedule 3, but wouldn't necessarily technically be compliant with Schedule 3 because it's not prescription, so it's arguably still not legal. I think more banks are going to open themselves up and say, hey, this is big business. We want to be a part of it, and this is at least more legal than it was, or at least legal enough for us to get comfortable with it. And then you could see cannabis businesses kind of having access to more banking products that traditional companies have access to, like lines of credit, equipment loans, that for the most part they've stayed away from.
Yeah, okay. But again, we don't know. So you're thinking, well, the other thing now, you realize Congress goes on an August recess. So if they don't get it done in July, then they kick it down the road to September. So it's hard to say how's that. Is it going to fast track that much, do you think?
Well, I mean, it would be an executive branch process, so Congress doesn't really have much of a say on that. But one other thing, since we're just running out of time, there's just a point I wanted to hit on because I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. I've read a lot of stuff on this. No one's mentioned it yet. But there is a line in this order that says, this does open up marijuana for export, subject to, required licensing. And that's something I think that could be, as a state, living in a state where we have overcapacity, very clear overcapacity, that could be something that's interesting down the line. I don't think that happens immediately or in a month or probably even a year.
Are you talking
But,
interstate commerce?
well, I mean, it could be to other countries.
Right.
A lot of Europe is starting to open up to this, but they don't have production capacity. And a lot of Europe is already importing marijuana from other countries.
Huh.
Who's to say, we don't throw our hats in that ring? So that's something that I'm keeping my eye on down the road. I mean, it was explicitly mentioned in this order. I don't think it's happening tomorrow, but it's something I'm certainly monitoring, and I think may open up opportunities sometime in the future. We'll see, though.
We'll see. All right, Tim or Scott, any final thoughts?
I would say on a final thought, kind of getting back to an overall theme here. I think, again, you've got a political problem in the United States in the sense that states like Texas, Idaho, Kansas, these states are just hardcore, at least the government over there. They just don't like it at all. And they're not going to want to step on those kind of toes. So I think that they will leave the regulation to the states. That again will, preserve the status quo.
States'
I
rights,
think,
be a states' rights issue then.
yeah, yeah. And I think ultimately, the game plan, I hope I'm right here, is to go to Schedule 3 for everything. And that will be the purpose of that hearing coming up. I think that is their agenda. I can't, nothing else makes any darn sense, especially if Trump is here to so-called reward his favorite people and cut taxes for the industry. I think that's what's going on. I can't see it settling out any other way.
Well, I did do some research earlier in the year, and let's just say that the marijuana lobby has been giving Trump a lot of money. So I'll just leave it at that. Scott, you got any final words?
I guess my final thought is, Schedule 3 could be a great thing, could be a good thing, could subject the adult use industry to another layer of regulation that may be tough, especially for smaller operators. So, well, I mean, I would say this is a win. This is a good day. Um, Much remains to be seen on what the actual impact is going to be. This could be a double-edged sword. This could be all gravy. That's one of those things we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out.
All right, I'm going to, Scott, tell people how they can reach out to you to tap into all your cannabis expertise and apparently property as well. So I'll give you
Well,
a
I mean,
shameless plug
we've
here.
been,
Go
I've
ahead.
operated Michigan cannabis properties for 6+ years, and we've done millions upon millions of transactions. But whether you want to reach out to me as a lawyer or as a broker, my email is the same. And that is Scott, SCOTT, at scottrobertslaw.com. We do now do business as Oak Law, but I still maintain that email address. So if you ever need to get a hold of me, just shoot me an email.
Final thoughts on what do you want to tell people about the Safer Group, Safer Michigan Group?
Well, no brag, but I think it's one of the finest listservs in the state. And one of the things it does, for people that are really into the cannabis issue, on whether they're an activist, a business person, attorney, we have been complimented over and over and over for news breaking on the Safer listserv well before any other media picks up on it. And before it gets into general distribution, people like it. I mean, most of the folks just kind of lurk there, and that's all right. We're also an interactive forum. You can express opinions and things like that. That's also welcome. But I think we do a pretty darn good job of delivering the news, at least on a daily basis. And